Welcome, everyone. Welcome very much to our listeners and to our viewers of the Lead to Succeed podcast, and an even bigger welcome to you, Judith Germain. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Judith, we're going to do a bit of background on you, first of all, so our listeners and viewers get a chance to get a bit of an understanding of what it is that you do. So Judith works with business owners to catalyse transformation, and Judith is the leading authority on Maverick Leadership, which we are going to be taking a big dive into. I am fascinated by this topic and we're going to be learning a lot more about it. And Judith is a business mentor, a speaker and an author, and you utilize Maverick leadership principles to create clear thinking and decisive leaders who are able to amplify their impact and influence to attract the clients and business that they want. Okay, important topics. And you are also the founder of the Maverick Paradox podcast and the Maverick Paradox magazine, which are excellent. Both are excellent, and I've enjoyed being a contributor to your magazine. So big welcome, Judith.
Hi.
Judith, the first question that I would like to ask you, so we get real clarity on what Maverick Leadership is all about, because you've been doing this since 2005, defining what a Maverick leader is and the skills and traits that they bring to leadership.
Okay, so Maverick Leadership is an adaptive form of leadership. It looks at who you are and what you do. And what I like to say is that most people think about leadership as that leadership cloak that you put on when you turn up to work. I think Maverick Leadership is the underwear you put on when you wake up. It's that integral to who you are.
Okay, so let's help our audience to define what a Maverick leader is in terms of some of the Maverick leaders, or some of the leaders out there that we all have heard of and all know of that are considered to be Maverick leaders, such as Steve Jobs, who unfortunately is not with us, but Richard Branson, Mark Zukerberg. Who else would you put into that category? Reed Hastings of Netflix. Bill Gates, even?
Yeah. So let me unpick that a little bit. So I see Mavericks as willfully independent people. So all of those individuals fit that category. But there's another couple of categories. One is an extreme leader. So that's one that has the normal traits of a willfully independent person, but they take it upon themselves. So they're very self-centered in their viewpoint and can be narcissistic, for example. And then you've got socialized mavericks who are working for the greater good. So again, same type of traits, but they push it out. So if you look at two of the American presidents, for example, Barack Obama and Trump, both maverick leaders, one is socialized maverick and one's an extreme maverick.
That is a great example. So thank you. That really helps to define it. I think we can all understand that example. What makes a socialized maverick? What are the skills and traits that you see of a socialized maverick? And are these skills that can be learnt, or is it something that you can develop or not?
Yes, that's right. So you can be a maverick by personality. So you've got the socialized and the extreme mavericks, but this also you've got the maverick behaviorists is where maverick leadership can really sit. So it's those that take the principles of being a maverick leader into their workplace, but they might be conformists when they come home. So they'll be looking to work for the greater good. They will work by principle. They will be more objective, less ego. So they're the people that respond rather than react to things. And they will put a priority on executing well, but without damaging people. So they're influencers, not manipulators.
An important distinction to make here. I really like that you have this driven acronym, and I wonder if we could dive into that a little bit and just explain what each of those letters stand for, because I think they give a very clear perspective of what a maverick leader is. So if we start with the first one, D, the first letter D, being very determined. So why is this a key skill of a maverick leader?
Okay, so that's where the willful independence comes from. And it's not willful like a toddler stamping their feet going, gimme, gimme, gimme,
Yeah.
gimme.
I don't know, that's the first sort of impression we might get of somebody being very willful. I want my own way, but it's not that at all.
No, it's not that at all. It's about being willful to do the thing that you believe is right, regardless of how other people are. So some people won't act because it might upset people. But a maverick leader, if they believe it's the right thing to do, they will do it, even if it upsets people, because it's the right thing to do. So if someone was going to abolish slavery, for example, in that time period, it would have been the wrong thing to do, but they would have been willful about getting that done because they believed it was the right thing. So that's an example. And people often use determination as a way of seeing, as an assessment really, on the people that's given them the work. How determined are they? Because I talk about driven as being the decisions that decisive leaders make. So it's like, how determined is this person for this to get done? So it's an indicator as well.
Okay, could you give an example? Do you have an example to share where you've actually measured that level of determination in a leader or an individual to actually make something happen?
That's right. So I did some work with a HR team. So there was about 10 or so HR managers. And what tended to happen is that their exec team would give them work all the time and they would do it, but they weren't doing it very well or prioritized. So they used to ask, how determined is the exec team for this to actually happen? And once they started to do that, they realized that all the urgent stuff they were given wasn't urgent at all, but they were being treated as urgent. So it had a huge implication on how they were executing stuff.
And it all comes down to execution at the end of the day. So we know that's critical. So how did you assess that? Do you have frameworks and methods that help people to assess that level of determination?
Not an exact framework. It's more looking at the why. So looking at the strategy, why are they doing it? Looking at where the emotion is lying. Is this an emotional response or is this a strategic objective response? What is it that they're expecting to achieve by this? What is the level of priority on it? So it's more a series of questions because they're adaptive, based around the determination level of the person that's doing it and the person that's asking you to do the thing.
Okay, thank you. Then the in driven R is reputation.
Reputation's key. So it's not about doing something so that you look good. It's more a recognition that reputation looks at the character of the individual, the intention of the individual, their competency and their track record. So the thing that you are doing, the decision that you're making, how does it fit in those areas? Because reputation is almost the lens that everything goes through.
Okay, and any particular examples, again, just to bring this home and so we really understand how this shows up in a maverick leader?
Yeah, so it's like being concerned that you get the right solution rather than being right. So you are able to say, oh, this new information means I'm wrong. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Let's do it your way. Your way makes more sense. So you're letting go of the ego because you're recognizing what reputation is made up of, and you're more concerned about the right solution rather than being right.
Okay, so I can begin to see now how each of these dovetail into each other, that ability to be adaptable, be willfully independent, but be adaptable to new advice or insights that come in. So you're not a stubborn, willful, independent person at all. You are taking all of these different things into perspective and considering them to be a maverick leader. The I is influence. So why that?
Because all good leaders, all maverick leaders, influence rather than manipulate. So when you're manipulating, you're only concerned in getting what you want done, with whatever means. If you're influencing, you are trying to make sure that the person that you want to do the thing is happy doing it. And when you're doing it, it's right for you as well, and it's right for society. So it's like the triple win. So I was doing some training the other day, and one of the solutions someone was talking about is to get people to compromise. And I said, I never get people to compromise, because it's like saying, would you be happy to lose? And who would be? I'm looking for commitment. So if I'm looking for the commitment to do a thing, not the compromise, because even if you're doing something that you might not everything that you wanted to do, but you make a commitment to do it, then it's good. Then you're influencing that person. Does that make sense?
It's very interesting, because are you saying then that you wouldn't compromise on anything when it comes to leadership, or was it just in that particular situation you were looking for that absolute commitment?
I think it's not about the action, it's about what the word means. Because I think the minute you ask people to compromise, they will react in, you're wanting to take something from me. So this is not about not changing your mind or having to do everything that you want to do. It's about recognizing that some words are triggering. So I'd be looking for people to commit. What can you commit to do is a much better question to what will you compromise? That's for me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's a get to the power of the words that we use. I did a post on LinkedIn late last year talking about how we'd compromised as a family on whether we had, I'm sorry about this, but white lights or coloured lights on the Christmas tree, and we decided to compromise by having two trees. And I didn't see that as a negative compromise, but others responded to say, yeah, compromise, I see it in a negative light. So we've got to be very careful about the words that we choose.
I totally agree, because for me, almost all words are neutral. So I will say, like, that's a really good argument. And for some people, the word argument is triggering, even though if you look in a dictionary, it doesn't mean you're having a fisty fight. It just means that you're debating it. So, and I think that's the thing as well, is that mavericks tend to be very careful of the words that they use, because they understand they have distinct meanings. However, not everyone is like that, so therefore there can be misunderstandings when people don't understand what you mean.
That's so true, isn't it? And also what people don't say can be another trigger, because you didn't actually say anything, that I was expecting you to say, or it's what was not said, that can also come into big consideration as a leader. Let's go through the others. Just got 3 more to go through. So versatility, meaning being flexible and creative. And I think you've demonstrated a lot of that already. So being receptive to new ideas, new information, or more than that.
And I think also, especially like if you're a business leader, you can have a very fixed idea about how your product or service is to be used. But if you're more versatile, you can actually listen to your client or your prospect and go, actually, I can flex it this way, and that would make it better for you.
Yes,
and that would work much better. And I think sometimes you see people who come out of corporate with very fixated ideas because it was formed in a corporate, which has been going for hundreds of years or whatever. Whereas if you, as a business owner, you need to be much more flexible or much more versatile. So it might be more facility around your payment terms, for example, depending on the circumstances. So it's being open to change, but the right change.
We said we would look at the how being a maverick leader impacts revenue growth or sales. And I think that is such a great example with the versatility, because at the end of the day, we have to be versatile to our clients, their needs, their demands, or not so much their demands, but their needs and their challenges, perhaps a better word. And bringing in that versatility in your solution and in your offer. So when you talk about being a maverick leader, being able to generate new business opportunities, is it particularly on the versatility side that you see that?
Yeah, and also being able to innovate and actually really listen to what the market is telling you. It reminds me, a few years ago, I came up with this fantastic product, in my opinion, and I was selling it, and each time I was selling it, the prospect was telling me what it needed to do, and I'd be like, oh, okay, and then I did that, oh, okay, and then I realised, actually, my product isn't brilliant, because everybody has asked for the same customization. It's like, okay, I hear it now. This is the way it has to be, because this is the way what people want. But you have to let go of ego. And I think when I help people to design their product offerings, I will say you need to take it out to market and test, because while it looks good on paper, you need to actually talk to people now to see. So don't bother spend a lot of time advertising, doing brochures. Test it first. When you've got 1 or 2 people who've bought and are happy, then you know it's the right service and product.
There is nothing better than getting that feedback in the market on something that you think is brilliant. Hey, it doesn't really matter. It's what other people think, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that feedback just makes your product better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never a failure. It's just ongoing enhancement and improvement. So yeah, really good point, Judith. Thank you. Let's go into execution. I am a big fan of execution. Tell me why that matters.
Because everybody wants to implement and very few want to execute. And the difference with that, I think, is that when you're implementing, you tend to be implementing a strategic plan.
Yes.
But when you're executing, you're going back before the plan and looking at strategically thinking the entire scenario and making sure that whatever is implemented is executed to plan. So, for example, if you think about COVID, people, and the corporate example, people were sent home and payroll went off and got everybody paid, and they implemented to the plan. Everyone got paid and it was brilliant. But it wasn't necessarily a great execution because the payroll people were burnt out. Loads of people left afterwards. What was executed was not what they foresaw in the beginning. Or sometimes you might see like a business will implement their plan and be very happy with the plan, but the plan doesn't solve the actual problem in the first place. But it's a great plan. So it's all about the execution, so that you're not executing something with results that you could have foreseen, basically. And what I talk to people about is that you run the process, you dummy run it first before you actually start to execute. So then you can test it, sandbox it before it's actually live.
And how does that play out for attracting new business, gaining new clients? How do you apply that there?
It's a good question. So I'm a firm believer that you need to be absolutely certain what it is that you're doing. And that sounds really silly, but you'll understand. I know you understand what I mean. Is that people are believe they're very clear of their product or the service, but when you start tugging at it, it comes apart because it's very generic. So you need to, if you want to execute well to get new clients, you need to make sure your proposition is really clear. It is beyond marketing. So some people stop when they got a marketing tag. That sounds really great, but that doesn't work. So you need to make sure that it actually fits the business and it fits you before you can narrate the story and have a template to work on. So what I found in the past is that it's really important to use 21st century ideas of marketing rather than 20th century ideas. So people would often say, find the hole in the market, fit into the hole, and all the clients will come. Well, that doesn't work anymore.
No.
And you're very uncomfortable in that tiny little square that you've made, where it's better to be very clear of who you are, what is it that you want to do, how do you want to do it, and then find the people who want you to do that with them, rather than trying to squeeze into something. So clear proposition, something that you can narrate. I know you're really into storytelling as well, so the right sort of story, recognizing the process of what you do. I have a thing called core identity, so it works out the core identity of you and the business, and that's then used as a foundation point that you can then attract people, so that when you're out in the market, it's very clear what you do. Even if you do different things, it's all under the same umbrella. So like for mine, it's about creating clear thinking and decisive leaders. Lots can fit underneath there, but I'm only pulling people who are interested in clear thinking and decisive leaders. Whether that is in diversity, culture, running the business, it doesn't really matter, but it means my proposition is quite clear.
And your proposition is very clear. And I've known you for a while. We've connected and commented on each other's content on LinkedIn for a good couple of years now, I would say.
Yeah.
Jude, and in preparation for this, I was going back over your marketing materials, and full credit to you, really clear, what you do.
Thank you.
So yeah, really, really spot on. You mentioned something just now, which I think reminds me of when we learn something new and then we think we've got it and then we try and explain it to somebody else and then it falls apart because actually we don't know it as well as we thought we knew it. And I think that plays into the point that you were making here. Things can fall apart, but we've got to make sure we really understand it in that sort of whole process that you were going through.
I always think if you need to, and you probably feel the same way having a podcast, if you can't speak off the cuff for 20 minutes on what you do in a way that's concise and memorable, then you probably don't know what you do. And I don't mean that in a horrible way, but it means that if it's taking you 40 minutes to talk 20 minutes of stuff, it's not very clear. And I think, I can't remember who said this, but it was, if you can't concise something and make it small, then you don't know it. If you can't make a situation simple, then you don't know it.
Yeah. And that reminds me of, I think Mark Twain said this, I couldn't write. Oh, come on, I'm going to get this all wrong now. Judith, help me out. What is it?
I did. Wasn't it? I didn't have time to write a short letter, so
I wrote a long one. Well done, Judith. Thank you. Yeah, it's exactly that principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being able to get it down concisely, clearly, and easily understood. So I guess this brings us on to narration, the N part of driven, the last letter in your acronym. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Everything's a story. So as humans, we're hardwired to understand and seek stories. So if we're selling something, we should be telling the story of it. And selling isn't just selling the service; it's also selling an idea, selling a change. Everything that we do, leadership and marketing, is the same coin. It's just flipped over. One's internal and one external. So, but they're both drawn together through storytelling. So if you want to attract new clients, then you need to have a good story to tell. And what is that story? And I think most people have one or two stories, and I think that's a failure. You need to have multiple stories because you do multiple things.
Well, I heard that Simon Sinek has one main story, and he puts that story on repeat. Now, he's well known, so I don't know how he manages to do that and keep it fresh. You got any thoughts on how he does that?
It's interesting because he's recently come out to say that he's not doing it anymore because he's burnt out with it.
Oh, is that right? I haven't heard that.
But yeah, I think if you think about it, though, with his Start With Why, which I think he started doing around about 2007, I think, and it took a few years before he was an overnight sensation with it. But Start With Why is a good umbrella story that lots of things fit underneath. So like when he's got Leaders Eat Last, it comes from starting with why. And I think that's the thing that people miss, is like they go for the one story when they should be looking at it as an umbrella. Because if you think about Start With Why, there's so much to be talking underneath that. There's the branding, it's the mindset, it's the how to tell stories, the order of the stories, how do you do a proposition, all of that comes from Start With Why. But he's known for Start With Why. But anything else he does, Start With Why is still a good foundation spot.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. Is that the sort of journey that you've been on with defining what a maverick leader is? Did you start with something a little different and you've now expanded it over the 9 years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, it's super crazy. So I came out of corporate. I was a HR manager, head of HR, and I was like, I'm never going to do anything corporate again. I've had enough. So I went the complete. I just dealt with entrepreneurs, and I only worked with maverick entrepreneurs. But I was struggling for years trying to figure out what it was that I did. And when I look back now, everything that I was doing fits under the umbrella of clear thinking, decisive leaders. But at one point I was doing reputational management, talent management, proposition stories, because I couldn't find the thing that called it all together. What was the umbrella? What was the thread that pulled it all together? And I didn't know I was supposed to do that either. Because even though I had training and marketing training and all sorts of training, nobody ever talks about that, the need for doing that. So I was completely frustrated because I was the person who could take 10 minutes to really tell you a sentence because I really didn't know anything. Whereas now, so I do this core identity piece, and it takes 5.5 hours for somebody to come up with the core identity over 3 sessions. And that really comes from me spending years in the wilderness getting super frustrated because people didn't understand what I was talking about. And that really upset me because I thought it was so super clear, and people was like, I don't get it. But I look back now and I can see why I didn't get it.
But we can also see that you use Maverick principles to be adaptable and versatile and keep pressing forward, although being willfully independent about what you were going to do and how you were going to do it. You were receptive to those messages and the feedback coming through and redefining and reassessing what your message.
Yeah, but that's also interesting because I didn't come up with those Maverick principles in the early days either. And I think what's key, for business owners to do is to constantly reflect what's working, what's not working.
Yeah.
Why are all the clients buying this, but they're not interested in that? And actually try to work out what's common. So I used to have a thing like if I could sell something 3 times, I'll be like, right, what is it about this, what made this work? And start working back and picking it and going, right, okay, now I know what to advertise.
So just very quickly, Judah, I don't know where time's gone, but did you know that it was Maverick Leadership back in 2005, or did you not have that heading?
I always had Mavericks, and Mavericks is willfully independent. But what did that mean exactly? I hadn't really determined. You know, I knew it was all about Mavericks. I think I started off talking about troublesome talent, which was the Maverick within the organisation. But I didn't transition into Maverick leadership per se until relatively a lot later because I was really focused on entrepreneurs, so I didn't need to. So I'm always very much is that if I'm going to make a change, I want it to be backwards compliant. And that's what that has meant for me, is that everybody knows me for Maverick and everybody sees it as one continuous journey, when in fact there's been lots of iterations on the way, but I've sewn them all together.
I think that goes back to we're all trying to do that in some way, shape or form, always refining. Well, we should always be trying to refine and improve what we do. Where does a growth mindset fit in to a Maverick leader, or do you have another frame of reference for mindset?
Well, I guess it fits in similarly to that idea that I want the right solution, and recognizing that our mind drives what our body does and the outputs that we want. So there's no point in wanting to be successful if you've got a mindset that it's not possible. So for me, all great leaders have a growth mindset, and they understand how to hack their brain so that they are thinking the thoughts that work for them. And that's where I think that fits in, really, is recognizing that you're not there yet, as opposed to you're never going to get there. Or, you know, a Maverick leader is not going to call themselves stupid. They may say, I made a really stupid decision, and separate themselves from the action. Because you can work on stupid decisions. It's hard to work on I'm stupid.
Yeah.
And it's recognizing that and going, right, and also understanding how to make your subconscious work for you is another thing as well.
I love all of those, but you talked about a mindset hack or a brain hack. Can't quite remember what you said, but I thought, let's hear a couple of yours.
Okay. So I know how my subconscious works, for example. So if I'm going to be putting together a proposal or a training program, something like that, I will get the information together. I will tell my subconscious, by X point, I want to know how I'm going to tackle this. And then I'll leave it to go, right? And go on and do something else, because I know in the background it's going to be doing its thing. Then I'll check in. It sounds like I'm being really weird. And I'll check in, like, how are we going with that? If nothing's happening, I repeat that with right, this is what we need to do. But what I'm trying not to do is have cognitive thought. I'm not trying to think it through. And then what I noticed then is that the information is bubbled. So it bubbles through and it's on point, and I can just get on with it. So any kind of major thing that I need to do, I will prepare my subconscious to think about it in the background for a while. And also reframing. So I was talking to somebody yesterday, and so I do a lot of mentoring and coaching, and back to that growth mindset. And I will explain how neuroscience works with the client, and I will reframe it in the moment. So they'll say something like, "I'm just rubbish at this," and I will immediately say, "You're working on that, but you'll be better soon." And then after a couple of times, they're like, "Oh yeah, okay." And then they will continue in that point. And obviously I give them some exercises to do as well. And what I find that the next time you see them, everything becomes positively stated, and they've improved so much because they're not having a toxic mindset that's actually working against them.
Well, thank you for sharing both of those, Judith. Big fan of the reframe. So easy to do for anything. As soon as you get that negative thought come in, reframe it, balance it out, think of it in a different way. And again, it reinforces what we've been talking about really throughout this podcast episode, is the power of the words that we use, what we give out, the words we give ourselves in our mind, the labels we put on ourselves, and also being very conscious of the words when we're speaking and engaging with teams.
Yeah, exactly. Don't talk bad on yourself.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that experiment they did with the plants. Did you see it? I think it was at a school. They had 2 plants.
Oh, yes.
And they did that one plant, they spoke love to it all the time. Nice words, you're really strong. Another one, they just slagged it off. And the one that they slagged off was practically dead. The other one had grown so much. So if you can do that to a plant, can you imagine if you did that to yourself or another person?
Yeah. That's a very strong note on which to press pause and say thank you so much for joining us, Judith. But before we finally close, what best way should our listeners get in touch with you if they want to find out more about Maverick Leadership and how it can be impactful in their businesses? And I know you've got a scorecard for influence, so maybe you want to mention that as well.
Yeah, so one of the key ways to get and attract more clients is to understand how to influence. So there is a scorecard that I have. It takes 5 to 7 minutes to do. It's at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com. So it's worth checking that out. You can find me on LinkedIn, Judith Germain, or you can email me at judith@maverickparadox.com.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you. I've really loved it. Is there any one last tip or any one last thing you would like to leave for the audience, for our listeners?
I think you can achieve anything that you want, especially if you become better at being a lateral thinker. So that's the ability of taking logic and imagination together. And if you want to see how other people do it, you can check out my magazine, which is at themaverickparadox.com, where there's lots of other lateral thinkers there.
And a very top-ranking magazine. Thank you, Judith, so much. Really appreciate your time and insights being shared today.
Thank you for having me.